Hello everybody. Today, by popular demand, we are going to be modifying a Rapidstrike from top to bottom. This is going to be a long mod guide, so sit down, strap in, and get your Rapidstrikes ready. Start by removing all the screws in the Rapidstrike. Remember to take out all of the attachment buttons here and also at the front and bottom rails. The stock easily lifts out. Also set aside the jam door, the rear sight aperture, the sling point, and the forward sight, and this bottom sling point here. Cut the cable from the motors to the battery tray. Set aside the blank half of the shell. Remove the magazine lock, being careful not to lose the spring that rests underneath this white piece over here. If you're like me and you lost it, you can replace it with the spring out of a clicking pen. Set this aside. Remove this other magazine lock here, again being careful not to lose the spring. This one is captive, so it shouldn't be as big of a problem. The main trigger assembly should pop right out. There are no screws holding it in place, there are still wires. To combat this, we must also take out this top shelf here, held on by 1, 2, 3 screws. There we have it. Remove this shelf and set it aside. Carefully cut these melted together posts to gain access to this lock here. Gently lift the wires out, and the lock will come free. With the lock and jam door in place, it's easy to see that the extended switch position is actually the on position, and the retracted switch position is the off or open position. Using a shop-made setup with alligator clips and wires, we can now test the Rapidstrike as if it was completely assembled. I'm going to remove this switch, effectively closing this part of the circuit. The Rapidstrike features a complex electromechanical system. Let's take a look at how it works. The first thing to note is that when the trigger assembly is removed, the dart advance seems to go crazy and actually advance darts as it should. That is due to this switch right here. This switch on this side is depressed when this orange lever is pushed down by the dart advance itself. It basically stops itself, as we see one more time. That's the switch right there. When it's in its proper cradle, however, everything is nice and static. The next switch is for the main motors. That would be this right here. This is another interesting one. This pushes down on another spring. This in turn pushes down on the switch on the back over here. The trigger can only be pulled when both the motors are revved and when this white piece here is pushed in by the magazine. This is a mechanical lock, not so much an electrical lock. Let's remove this mechanical lock. Upon inspection, it's easy to see that this lock here, actuated by the magazine, simply pushes a key to the side, which allows the trigger to unlock. By removing some material on this side, one can easily get this lock mechanism out of the trigger assembly. Cut a channel here so this can slide all the way out. You can also remove the entire nub. Either way, your captive piece is now out. And now The trigger is free to move, so long as this button is depressed. This next mechanical lock is actually necessary for the blaster to function. If this button down here is not depressed while the trigger is depressed, that means that on the blaster itself, darts will be pushed into the feeding mechanism. However, the rotors will not be spinning up here, so the dart or the blaster will just jam up. The next step is to overvolt the Rapidstrike. Originally there were 4 C batteries delivering 6 volts of electricity. Now we're going to double that to 12 volts using AA batteries. These batteries don't last quite as long as C batteries, however the voltage is the same and they are more resistant to changes in temperature than AAA batteries. One battery box will go in the stock, rendering it fixed in the outward position, and one battery box will go in the front of the blaster where the batteries initially were. Some modification is necessary to get these to fit, and we'll go over that right now. Next, make sure the stock is in its collapsed position and cut this bottom foot to be the same length as the top foot here. Clean up the cut with a little sandpaper. Attach the 9-volt connector and test fit the battery box into the rear of the stock. It should come to this first rib here and be flush with that rib. In this way, we'll be able to put all the mechanisms back in the front. Don't forget to reinsert the metal pin into its housing. Let's move to the front of the blaster. It's easy to see that there isn't enough space in this front compartment to house this new battery box. The easiest way to solve this is simply to cut right down the middle of this old battery tray, allowing this to fit inside here. The battery tray will no longer be used and will only be used to push this to the back of the blaster. And clean it up with a little sandpaper. With the battery tray in place, this battery box can stay in there without much movement. If you would like to remove these springs in the back, now would be the time to do so. You can simply use a needle nose plier and pull them straight out. I'm going to leave them in, but I'm snipping off these leads here to make it easier assembling the electronics. The motor box can also be opened up on the Rapidstrike. To start, take out this screw holding in this plastic piece here. Take out the 4 screws around the outer perimeter. These screws will be longer than the rest of the internal screws. This frees the motor assembly. Underneath this shield here is actually a printed circuit board containing these green inductors here and those yellow disc capacitors. These capacitors and inductors serve to basically smoothen out the DC current provided by the batteries. A lot of people remove these components, but I'm going to keep them in there. We're going to put this back into its place because there's nothing more that we could really do to this. Reassembling the blaster can be a bit of a chore, so we're going to go step by step. Place the dart pusher back in its appropriate location. Put back the 3 screws that originally came with it. Next, take your safety switch and simply orient it back into position. No screws hold this in place, so merely leave it be. Place the trigger assembly back in its position, keeping these wires underneath the assembly itself. Push them through this little notch here where they originally went. If you haven't done so already, reassemble the motor assembly. Recall that this shiny wide screw went over this rubbery piece, and the 4 screws that go into this are longer than the other internal screws. Make sure the black and white wire are again in their respective channel right here. Our system now has multiple battery components. No need to worry, we simply need to hook them up. Take a generous amount of wire, remove the end of the insulation on your wire using either scissors or a wire stripper, and mate the two battery boxes together with this wire, red to black. Do this on only one connection. If you have a soldering iron available, now would be the time to solder. Make sure you're in a well-ventilated area if you choose to solder. Otherwise, simply connect these two using electrical tape. Cut a small channel in the shell right about here in front of the magazine well. This will allow the wires to fit through and be able to be snaked into this channel here. Next, connect the red wire to the red wire and the black wire to the black wire. And seal each connection with electric tape. Give your blaster a test fire if you want. If it screams, you're doing something right. Insert the rear battery pack into the back of the stock. And simply insert it. Make sure this metal pin didn't fall out of your stock. Place the barrel back into the front of the blaster, locking it in place, and collect the wires in the front in this little channel here. Depress the battery connection wire, the white wire and the black wire in here, and reinsert this orange bar to hold everything in place. And screw it in place. This is where one of the old magazine locks went. We don't need this anymore, so you can discard it. Install this block piece first directly into the catch channel. Install this levered piece directly on top of it, so this hole engages in this catch here. And then install the orange button on top of that with the large foot facing the bottom. Install the sling hook. Install the top sight hook and the rear aperture as one unit. This also holds in place the safety button here. Install the forward aperture and the front sight. Next, add the screw ports for the battery tray and these little doohickeys. Now we're ready to close everything up. Reinsert the jam door and make sure the magazine well is inserted properly. Everything should fit together snugly. If wires are getting in the way of reassembly, stuff them into a channel or hold them in place with some electrical tape. When you reassemble this, remember to put all the screws in their proper location. The smallest screws go along the top rail and along this bottom tactical rail here, and the longest screw goes in the front sight. Now let's add a little flair to our blaster before we seal it up, and I don't mean just lights. The only safety on this blaster is currently the access door. I have an old extension spring that should work as a forward assist for the jam door. I also have some scrap polycarbonate that should act as a lever to actuate the forward assist. Make a mark with the jam door in its most retracted position. Then cut out this mark about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. For the spring to be mounted, you have to remove a little bit of material in this area, and also the tiny nub that is riding along the rail here. This isn't necessary anymore because the spring locks it forward as opposed to that little nub. To make the outer lock of the blaster, all you need are 2 pieces of material. I used polycarbonate, a spring here to act as a force on the lever, and the lever itself should have a small hook on the top. In this way, when the door is pulled back, it will catch on the lip of this lever, and when you press this button back, it'll launch forward. So this is a cool little addition to add to the Rapidstrike as well. Now screw everything back together, and you'll be good to go. Let's test it out. Thanks for watching, everybody. Leave a like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, or check out my Facebook to stay up to date. Thanks for watching, everybody, and Nerf on.